Snow slammed the windows like handfuls of gravel, the wind a long animal howl running the spine of the mountain. In the old cabin, Hannah Miller watched the stove's dull orange eye breathe and fade, breath fogging the air when she leaned too far from the heat. The rafters creaked. Somewhere a loose gutter tapped, counting seconds or maybe heartbeats. The first knock came thin through the storm. She thought it was a branch. The second was unmistakable. A quick, desperate rhythm that found her chest and tightened it. She stood, blanket falling from her shoulders, and reached for the iron fire poker. Cold kissed her palm through the flaking black paint. "Who is it?" Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. "Please." A man's shout, nearly taken by the wind. "My boy, he's freezing." Hannah unlatched the door and the storm shouldered in. On the porch a man stood with snow packed in his eyelashes, a knit cap crusted white. Beside him a boy, 8 maybe, hunched inside an oversized coat, lips bluish, cough rattling up from somewhere too deep. "Just one night," the man said. "I'm Michael. This is Noah." Her first instinct urged no. Her second was the cough. She stepped back, the hinge screaming, and let them pass. The warmth inside was a thin grace. Michael's hands shook as he stripped off the boy's wet coat. Underneath, Noah's sweater clung dark with melt. Hannah kept the poker against her leg, trying to read the man's posture. Hands careful, motions practiced. He rubbed the boy's arms until the skin blushed. "Bathrooms at the back," she said, throat tight. "Towels on the shelf. Dry him." Michael nodded once. "Thank you." The words landed like something heavier, gratitude with a bruise under it. While they were gone, she cleared space near the stove, moved the wire rack closer. Her mug still steamed faintly. Coffee and wood smoke threaded the room. She set out a dented saucepan, the square of instant noodles she was saving for tomorrow, hesitated, and broke it in half. The storm hit the roof like fists. The light blinked. Then the cabin surrendered. A small pop, a soft hush. The power died, leaving only the stove's low glow and the dark pressing its face to the windows. Michael returned with Noah bundled in one of her old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled 3 times. The boy's cough had softened to a wheeze. Hannah set the poker against the stone hearth and struck a match. Candlelight pooled, warm and unsteady. "Sit," she said, "closer to the heat." Noah obeyed, eyes glassy but curious, following the match flame as if it were a tiny sun. Michael crouched beside him, palms open to the stove. He looked at Hannah then, quick, assessing, not asking for more than she'd offered. "How long have you been out?" she asked. "Road closed behind us. We tried to turn back." He glanced at the window where snow chased itself in frantic spirals. "Didn't make it." Water hissed into a boil. She crumbled the noodles, poured the dusty broth packet, watched it cloud and turn the water a consoling brown. When she handed Noah the chipped bowl, his hands trembled with hunger. He ate slowly at first, like he was being watched by some rule he couldn't see, then faster when the warmth sank in. She gave Michael the other half. He started to refuse. She stared at him until he accepted, broke a corner off, and passed it back to Noah without a word. The small choreography tugged at her in a place she avoided. "What's your name?" Noah asked suddenly, voice hoarse. "Hannah." He nodded solemnly, as if filing it away. "Thank you, Hannah." Michael's shoulders lowered a fraction. He found the wool blanket folded on the chair arm and draped it over the boy with the same care he'd used at the door, hands pausing to tuck the edge beneath Noah's feet. The gesture was simple. It was everything. Hannah poured hot water over a tea bag until the air smelled faintly of lemon. The candle wick sputtered, steadied. Outside, the world vanished in white. Inside, 3 breaths found the same rhythm, the stove ticking soft as a clock. "Just one night," she said at last, more to herself than to them. Michael met her eyes. There was a thank you there again, and something like apology. "Just one night," he agreed. The storm had swallowed the world whole. Beyond the cabin walls, there was nothing but white and wind, the kind that pressed against the windows as if it wanted in. Inside, The dim light of 2 candles trembled on the table, making the shadows stretch and retreat like wary animals. Hannah sat stiffly in the wooden chair, the fire poker lying across her lap. Every creak of the cabin seemed louder now, as though the place itself was testing her nerves. Across from her, Michael crouched near the stove, carefully hanging Noah's soaked clothes on the wire rack. His hands moved with a quiet precision, wringing out the fabric, spreading it so the heat could reach. The boy sat wrapped in Hannah's old flannel, a wool blanket tucked around his shoulders. His cough rattled, harsh against the smallness of his chest. Michael poured steaming water into a mug and blew across the rim before offering it to his son. "Slow sips," he whispered. His voice was low, steady, like someone who had said those words before, many nights in many places. Hannah's grip on the poker eased a fraction, but she did not let it go. Distrust was a muscle she had trained well. "I don't usually open my door," she said finally. Her voice cracked like the wood in the stove. Michael glanced up, not defensive, not apologetic. "I figured." He adjusted the blanket around Noah. "I wouldn't have knocked unless I had no choice." The boy coughed again, then whispered, "It's warm here." His small face turned toward Hannah, eyes shining in the candlelight. "Thank you." The words struck her more than they should have. She cleared her throat. "I'll get you something hot." She filled the saucepan with water and set it on the stove. From the cupboard she pulled a pack of instant noodles, the kind she stretched over 2 meals when tips were thin. She tore it in half. One half went into the pot. The other she held for later, then sighed and dropped that in too. The smell rose quickly, salty and familiar. She poured the noodles into 2 chipped bowls and set them on the table. Noah's hands shook when he reached for his. Michael steadied the bowl for him. "You eat too," Hannah said, her tone more command than kindness. Michael hesitated, then picked up the other bowl. He broke off a piece of noodle and passed it back to his son before taking any for himself. They ate in silence, the storm hammering the walls, the stove ticking softly like a tired clock. Candle wax dripped in slow rivers. After a while, Noah leaned against his father's arm, eyes fluttering. Michael stroked his damp hair back from his forehead, his touch patient, deliberate. Hannah watched the way his hand lingered a moment too long, as if steadying not just the boy but himself. "You live out here alone?" he asked quietly, breaking the hush. Hannah's fingers tightened on the poker. "Yeah. Must get lonely." She gave a short laugh without humor. "That's the point." Michael didn't press. He simply adjusted the blanket once more, then looked toward the stove as if weighing how much wood remained. The storm roared outside, rattling the cabin like a beast trying to claw its way in. Inside, though, the air had shifted. Still cautious, still uneasy, but touched by something else too. Something almost like the beginning of trust. By morning, the storm showed no sign of mercy. The world outside was nothing but blinding white, wind shrieking through the pines. Snow had piled against the cabin door so high that when Michael tried to push it open, it barely budged. "We're not going anywhere," he muttered, breath steaming in the cold air. Hannah stood behind him, arms crossed. The poker leaned in its usual place by the stove, though she hadn't touched it since last night. "Told you, these storms can last for days." Michael glanced back at Noah, still curled on the couch beneath a heap of blankets. His cheeks were flushed, his small chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. Hannah knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his forehead. "Too warm." She bit her lip. "He needs rest," she said, though the words felt thin, like paper trying to hold back water. Michael nodded, jaw tight. Then he slipped on his boots, grabbed the axe from beside the door, and stepped outside into the blizzard. Snow immediately swallowed him. Hannah stared after him, a part of her bracing for the possibility he might not come back. But less than half an hour later, he returned, coat heavy with ice, arms stacked with logs. He shook the snow off and stacked the wood neatly by the stove. "Fire won't last otherwise," he said simply, setting another log into the flames. Hannah didn't answer. She only watched as he wiped his wet face with the back of his hand, then glanced at the roof where water had begun dripping onto the floor near the table. Without a word, he grabbed a hammer from the shelf and climbed the rickety ladder outside. The sound of nails and wood carried faintly through the wind. By the time he came back in, his face was raw from the cold. The leak had stopped. He noticed the front step sagging under its own rot and crouched down with a handful of nails. One by one, he straightened the board until it held steady. "You don't have to fix everything," Hannah said quietly. Michael gave her a faint smile. "I don't know how not to." The cabin felt different after that, less broken, less forgotten. Hannah busied herself at the stove, boiling water, tearing bread into pieces for broth. When Noah stirred awake, shivering, she sat beside him and began to read aloud from an old paperback she found in a drawer. Her voice was rough at first, uncertain. But as Noah's eyes followed her words, soft and intent, she steadied. "Again," he whispered when she paused. So she read another page. Then another. Michael sat at the table, repairing a loose chair leg, though his gaze often lifted, watching the two of them silent, as though he'd stumbled upon something he didn't dare disturb. By evening, the blizzard's howl had dulled into a low moan. The cabin glowed with firelight, the smell of wood smoke and broth thick in the air. Noah had drifted back to sleep, cheeks less fevered. Hannah tucked the blanket snug around his shoulders. When she straightened, Michael was there, holding out the repaired chair. Didn't mean to snoop, just thought it might be useful. For a long moment their eyes held. Hannah saw the weariness in him, lines etched by years of carrying more than one man should. And beneath it, something steadier. The same quiet care he'd shown his son, now extended to her home. "Thank you," she said, softer than she intended. He nodded, stepping back. The storm outside had cut them off from the world. But inside, a strange resemblance of family had begun to take shape. Fragile, unspoken, and no less real for being temporary. The storm quieted by the next evening, but the world remained buried. Through the frosted window Hannah could see only white mounds where trees had stood, their shapes softened into silence. The cabin seemed like an island, adrift in an ocean of snow. Inside, the fire burned steadily thanks to Michael's careful tending. He chopped wood in measured rhythm, never wasting motion, while Hannah stirred a pot of thin stew stretched with potatoes and carrots she'd been saving. Noah sat at the table, cheeks still flushed but no longer burning, a pencil moving restlessly across a piece of paper. Hannah glanced over. "What are you working on?" Noah's tongue poked out at the corner of his mouth as he bent lower, determined. "Drawing." The boy didn't look up until he finished the last line. Then he stood on unsteady legs, padding across the floor to the far wall. With a piece of tape borrowed from Hannah's drawer, he pressed the paper against the faded wood paneling. Michael set down the log he was splitting. "What is it, buddy?" Noah stepped back, proud. On the paper, rough lines formed a small cabin, crooked but recognizable. At the door stood a woman with long hair, opening it wide. Beside her, a man and a boy stood in the snow. The boy's face was round, smiling. Above them, scribbled stars filled the sky. "That's us," Noah announced. "When she let us in." Hannah froze where she stood, ladle hovering over the pot. Her throat tightened. Michael walked closer, eyes fixed on the child's drawing. His expression shifted. Something flickered there, quiet and unreadable, before he looked down at his son. "It's good," he said softly, voice catching in his chest. Noah grinned. "Now it's home." The words landed heavy in the room. Hannah swallowed, looking at the crooked lines taped to her wall. For years, her cabin had been nothing more than survival, wood stacked in corners, bills piled on the counter, empty evenings marked by silence. Now, with one child's drawing, the space felt changed, softened. She set the ladle down and wiped her hands on her apron, though they weren't wet. Slowly, almost shyly, she walked over to the drawing. The pencil strokes were uneven, the stars nothing more than circles scribbled in haste. But her door was wide open, filled with light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Michael stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers lightly. He didn't move away. She felt the warmth of him, the steady presence, and it startled her more than the storm ever had. When she finally turned, he was watching her. Not with demand, not with expectation. Just a look, quiet, searching, as if he was asking a question without speaking it. Hannah's chest tightened. She turned back to the drawing. The stew bubbled softly on the stove. Noah hummed to himself, pleased, already searching for another scrap of paper. For the first time in years, Hannah realized her home didn't feel empty. Not tonight. The blizzard finally broke on the third morning, leaving behind a silence almost too sharp to bear. Snow glittered across the mountains like crushed glass, the air brittle and bright. For the first time in days, Hannah left the cabin, trudging down the slope toward the narrow road. She had a shift at the diner, the kind she couldn't afford to miss. She walked fast, head bowed against the glare, boots sinking deep in the drifts. When she glanced back, the cabin looked smaller than ever, a wooden box swallowed by the white. But smoke still curled faintly from the chimney, and she thought of Noah's laugh echoing through the rooms. Her shift was long, the kind that stretched bone and patience thin. Coffee poured, plates cleared, fake smiles practiced for tourists who tipped in coins. By the time she trudged back up the mountain road, night was settling, the cold biting harder. She pictured the cabin as she climbed. Imagined Noah's cough easing by the fire, Michael stacking wood, maybe that crooked drawing still clinging to her wall. But when she pushed open the door, the silence struck her. The cabin was spotless. Blankets folded with care, dishes stacked neatly by the sink, the floor swept of ash and snow. The fire burned low but steady, as if someone had tended it with intention before leaving. Her gaze swept the room. The couch was bare. The corner where Noah had kept his small pile of crayons was empty. The wall still held his drawing, the crooked little cabin with stars and an open door. But the boy himself was gone. On the table by the window lay an envelope. Beside it, a folded piece of paper. Hannah's hands trembled as she picked it up. Thank you for opening your door. You gave us more than shelter, you gave us hope. We had to move on. Please accept this, though it can't cover what you gave us. No signature. Just a steady, unadorned scrawl. Inside the envelope, cash. Crisp bills counted to $500. Her throat closed. 500 meant more than weeks of tips, more than a month's rent. It was survival. But as she held it, it felt heavy with something else. Emptiness. Hannah sank into the chair, staring at the envelope, then at Noah's drawing. The crooked stars seemed to blur as her eyes filled. For the first time in years, her home hadn't felt empty. Now, with everything neatly in place, the emptiness felt bigger than before. She pressed her hand to the wall where Noah's paper clung. The tape had begun to curl at the edges, but the drawing held fast. The cabin was warm. The bills were real. Yet Hannah sat in silence, knowing that what she truly wanted had walked out into the snow without goodbye. Weeks slid by in gray repetition. Snow melted from the mountains, leaving behind mud, broken branches, and potholes the county wouldn't fix. At the diner, hours were cut. Hannah's manager mumbled something about slow season, but she knew it meant fewer tips, fewer chances to scrape by. Her savings, never more than a whisper, dwindled to nothing. She pawned her mother's old locket for grocery money, walked to shifts to save gas, counted coins at night with the same shame she remembered from childhood. The envelope Michael had left should have stretched longer. She told herself she would guard it, use it only for rent, emergencies. But life was nothing but emergencies. The electric bill, the leaking roof, the cracked tooth she couldn't afford to fix. By the third week, only 220s remained. Then came the day her manager called her aside, wiping his hands on his apron. He wouldn't look her in the eye. We're letting you go, Hannah. Nothing personal. Just cuts. The words rang in her ears as she stepped out into the wind. She walked aimlessly through town, past shuttered shops and frost-streaked windows. Each step echoed the same refrain. Nothing left, nothing left. That evening, when she returned to the cabin, A letter waited in the mailbox. The envelope was thick, official-looking, the return address stamped with the seal of Denver City office. She slid it open with trembling fingers. We invite you to interview for the Carter Outreach Program, a new initiative designed to provide support for rural families and individuals in need. Your experience and resilience make you a strong candidate. Please join us in Denver on the 14th. She read it twice, then a third time. Carter Outreach. She had never applied. She didn't even know how they found her. Still, 3 days later, Hannah boarded a bus with her last crumpled bills and a borrowed coat. Denver stretched tall and gleaming against the sky, glass and steel like another planet. Her reflection in the building's revolving doors looked out of place. Tired eyes, second-hand shoes, a woman who didn't belong. Inside, she followed a receptionist through halls lined with framed photographs. Children smiling with backpacks, families holding keys to new homes, classrooms bright with donated books. At the end of the corridor, a door opened into an office with wide windows overlooking the city. And there he was, Michael. He rose from behind the desk, his suit sharp, his presence steady. For a moment, Hannah thought her mind was playing tricks. But Noah's drawing hung framed on the wall, her crooked cabin, the open door, the 3 figures beneath a sky of stars. Her breath caught. I don't understand. Michael's expression was calm, almost tender. I should have told you. My name is Michael Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises. He gestured to the walls, to the photographs. This program, your kindness inspired it. That night in the storm, you gave us shelter when we had nothing to offer. I wanted to build something that gave others the same chance. Hannah stood frozen, her hands clutching the strap of her bag. All the nights of hunger, the fear of eviction, the endless work, suddenly collided with this moment, this man, this truth. You're not a drifter, she whispered. He shook his head. No, but I was lost, Hannah. More than you knew. You reminded me what mattered. The city hummed beyond the glass. Inside the quiet office, she felt the floor tilt beneath her, as if the storm had returned. Not of snow this time, but of everything she thought she knew. And in the center of it stood Michael, not a stranger anymore, but something far more complicated. The office was quiet except for the low hum of the city below. Hannah sat stiffly in the chair across from Michael, her hands clasped tight in her lap. She still couldn't reconcile the man in front of her, the one in the polished suit, the one whose name appeared in headlines, with the man who had carried wet logs through a blizzard, whose son had coughed himself to sleep on her couch. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. I didn't want to repay you with just money. That would have been an insult to what you gave us. He glanced toward the wall where Noah's framed drawing hung, its crooked lines bright against the glass. This was the beginning, and I want you to be part of it. Her throat was dry. Part of what? The outreach program, he said simply. We're building teams across Colorado. Real people who understand what hardship feels like, who know what it means to open a door even when they have nothing. You'd be working with us. With me. Hannah blinked. The words barely fit inside her. She thought of the diner with its chipped mugs, the cabin with its leaking roof, the endless stretch of days that had felt like survival and nothing more. And now, this offer, impossible and terrifying and too big to believe. You think I could do that? She whispered. Michael smiled faintly. I know you could. You already did. For a moment, neither spoke. The city gleamed through the windows, indifferent to the fragile silence between them. Finally, Hannah stood, unable to sit still any longer. She walked to the wall and stared at Noah's drawing. The taped edges had been replaced with a frame of dark wood, the glass polished until it caught the light. Her cabin, her open door, the 3 of them standing together under a storm of stars. Her hand lifted, almost without thought, and touched the glass. The memory of Noah's small voice returned. Now it's home. When she turned, Michael was watching her. His gaze wasn't the gaze of a CEO or a man measuring outcomes and profits. It was quiet, steady, almost vulnerable. I didn't just want to find you for the program, he admitted. His voice had softened. I wanted to see you again, to tell you in person what I couldn't say that morning. Her heart thudded painfully. What's that? That you changed something in me, he said. Not with grand gestures, just by opening your door. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. Carried warmth, weight, something Hannah hadn't felt in years. She sank back into the chair, breath uneven. The storm, the nights by the fire, Noah's cough, the sudden emptiness when they vanished. Every piece of it led here, to this room, this man. For a moment she let herself imagine it. A life not built on scraping by, but on giving. A life where her small acts mattered, where maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. Her eyes lifted to his. Then maybe, she said quietly. This is the beginning. Michael nodded once, slowly. His smile was not triumphant, not polished, just real. And for Hannah Miller, the poor waitress who had once doubted whether opening her door was a mistake, the truth of who he was, and the feelings now blooming in the fragile space between them, left her breathless. Outside, the morning sun caught the glass of the skyscrapers and turned the city gold.